One of the best things that Church Answers did was to bring Ryan Burge onto the team. I mean, he's humble to a point, but it's just been great to have Ryan Burge on the team. As a result, we now have Sam, the Burge Report. Pretty cool, huh?
I'm thrilled about doing this on the podcast on Rainer on Leadership. Ryan, welcome to the show.
When are we going to get some intro music, guys? Let's work on that, okay?
Oh, no.
It's
It'll be there.
It's
okay,
there.
good.
I want to
hear some.
You're not hearing the bumpers, but you're going to have the intro music there.
We'll do some lo-fi hip hop beats just for you.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate that.
So Ryan,
and that's a bit of an inside joke. I asked Ryan what music he listens to, and he really doesn't listen to much of anything other than work music, which is lo-fi sort of stuff in the background. So
that's right.
It was about the most boring answer you could have possibly given.
Well, I'm the most boring guy you could possibly ask for, but I have interesting data. I don't have to be interesting. The data can be interesting. That's my job.
Fair enough.
And this is the guy that told me before we went on air, at your age, Tom, you don't have to be cool. So I don't know if I feel good or bad.
I'm not the arbiter of cool, Tom. I can tell you that right now.
Well, we have Ryan Burge, and we are grateful. I went to Dean Sweetman. I said, we're going to have Ryan Burge. Would you like to be the sponsor? And he said, Tithely will grab it right away. So all of the Burge reports is a part of Rainer on Leadership. All of the Burge reports are sponsored by Tithely. Get their report. They have a free report called the 2023 State of the Church Giving Report. It is really database. It is really good. And it's some stuff that you need to have. And so, Dean, Tithely, thank you so much. And for those of you who are listening, is this on YouTube too, Sam? I got to ask that. So those who are listening and those who are watching on our YouTube channel, then get that report. Get that report. Not only subscribe on YouTube and give a thumbs up, but give us a good review. Give us something on your podcasting app that is positive for us, whatever you call it on your podcasting app. Sam, how about introducing the topic? And then we mainly want to listen to Ryan. That's his name, right? Ryan.
Thanks, Tom. I can tell I really matter in your life. Really made an impact.
It's Ryan Burge, but if you get it all mixed up, you can just call him Ryan Verge. Yeah. So there you go. So we're going to be talking about who is attending church more frequently now than in the past. And Ryan has done this research. He has the answer. So Ryan, why don't you just kind of get us an introduction to this question? What is your answer?
Yeah. So the answer is almost no one is going to church now more today than they were 20 or 30 years ago. In 2008, about 45 million Americans were never attending religious service. Today, it's about 85 million. So 45 million to 85 million, an increase of 40 million people are never attenders today that weren't 14 years ago. The share who are attending weekly has dropped from 70 million to 62 million. Somewhere around 2016, the never attending line crossed the weekly attending line. And so now there are clearly more never attenders in America than weekly attenders. In The Great Dechurching, Michael Graham and Jen Davis and I wrote a book about kind of this statistic. That 40 million people that we just talked about is more than both the first and second Great Awakening and every Billy Graham revival combined. And the number of people who converted to Christianity have become never attenders in just the last 14 years.
Wow.
So this is not only a generational reality, it's also a state reality. So even when you break the data down to like the state level, you might think, well, what about the Bible Belt? What about Mississippi? What about Alabama? It really, almost every state has also experienced declines.
Yeah, that's what's really interesting to me is that the biggest declines are in places where you would think religion would be the strongest, places like Texas and Oklahoma. Oklahoma's down 15%. Texas is down 10%. This is the share attending weekly, dropped between 2008 and 2022. But even in Alabama, it's down 9%. Georgia's down 8%. Mississippi's 11%. So really the Bible Belt has been as hard hit by this decline. And part of that is because the data is relatively recent, the last 15 years or so. For other regions, the decline has been earlier in the decades, and let's say in the 70s and 80s, and I don't have access to that kind of data. But definitely in the last 15 years, we're seeing the bigger declines in places where religion tended to be strongest. We call that a floor effect, by the way. It's easier to drop from, let's say, 60% to 50% than 20% to 10%. because you kind of hit a floor in the data, and it's hard to go down from that point. So probably what's happening with like the Northeast, let's say, or the Pacific Northwest is they hit the floor effect 30 years ago. And now the South is trying to getting closer to that floor in the data, which is why you're seeing the bigger drops in the South than you're seeing in other places right now.
You have a wide range of audiences that listen to you, that read your Substack, that basically are Burge followers in many different ways.
I'm one of them.
I know you introduced me to Ryan. You introduced me to him. So okay.
Can I tell you a funny story about that? I was a youth pastor at my very first church ever. There was a lady on the church council who had been on the church council for 3 years. She still thought my name was Brian after 3 years on staff at her church. So I'm completely used to it, Tom. Don't worry about it.
Well, I do worry about it because someone's going to take me away soon. In fact, I have a commitment with my 3 sons that if I really start showing signs of aging, whether it's serious dementia or whatever it is, that they're going to get a pillow and they're going to put it over my face and they're going to all sit on it. So I have that commitment from my sons, and the way Sam is looking at me is like,
for the sake of our listeners, you have asked for that. We have not committed to it.
Sam, please commit a felony for me. Thank you.
Murder.
So
that's a capital offense too.
Oh, well. Hey, back to the question. So you have this broad range of audiences. Sometimes you're talking to atheists. Sometimes you're talking to ultra progressives. Sometimes you're talking to ultra fundamentalists. How are they receiving this kind of information where we're seeing more and more doing less and less in the church? How are they receiving it?
It depends on who they are, obviously. And it's really, to me, the really interesting way is like when I post data about like the Episcopal Church declining, which is a very liberal denomination, white Protestant denomination. It's really interesting to me who is like dancing on their graves and who is not. Like evangelicals sometimes like, yay, look at the Episcopalians going away because they think that's a not correct version of Christianity. But then atheists are really kind of conflicted about what to do with that data because politically, atheists and Episcopalians are in cahoots with each other. They both vote for Democrats, but they also don't like religion. Atheists don't. So, it's like, well, we're happy because religion's going away, but we're sad because we're losing the liberal flavor of Christianity. And so you see these weird like calculations going on in people's heads trying to figure, it's like, hey, wait, how should I feel about this? Is this good news or is this bad news? And sometimes what's fascinating is I'll write a post on my Substack and think this is the way to think about the data in like a very specific way. And the responses I get were, no, this is really about this. And I'm like, man, I realize how limited my perspective is on data because I only see it the way my brain tells me to see it. And other people can look at the exact same results and have a completely different theory about what's going on and why that matters.
Well, we're talking to Ryan Burge. This is the inaugural edition of the Burge Report on Reign on Leadership at Church Answers. We're delighted to have him. And again, let me thank Tithe Lee, and let me remind you that we have a link where you can get an incredible report on giving in 2023. Sam, I'll turn it to you, and you might even remember his name, so you can ask him a question.
No, I do know his name. Ryan. It's Ryan.
Thank you.
It's Ryan.
So politically, you mentioned Democrats. If you look at the breakdown between Republicans and Democrats, where are we seeing declines there?
So fascinatingly enough, in the last 15 years, Republicans have seen their church attendance decline faster than Democrats. But again, that's that floor effect, right? Democrats have been leaving the church for 50 years now. For Republicans, it's more of a last 15 or 20 year phenomena. So the decline amongst Republicans is double digits, still only like 5 or 6 points amongst Democrats. But again, I think what's happening here is Republicans just started at a much higher set point than Democrats did, so they had further to drop. And I think what's also happening, and this is something, I'm going to use a term that sometimes you hear kind of like weaponized in a bad way, which is generational replacement. You hear this term like the Great Replacement Theory, which is honestly pretty nationalistic and it's xenophobic, which is the idea of like Hispanics are coming across the board to replace all the white people in America. But from a demographic perspective, generational replacement is how society changes, which is just that older people die and are replaced by younger people. Happens in every society, has happened since the dawn of time. And this is one of the reasons attendance is dropping too, right? It's not that people are leaving the pew, like just walking away from religion. It's that older people tended to be, and they still tend to be, more religiously active, and they're dying. and who is replacing them on the bottom end of the age spectrum. So the 18-year-olds coming up into attendance, they are not attending at nearly the same rate as older people were who died off. And so what happens is, and this is like, it's hard to, you can't feel this in many ways until it's been 5 or 10 years because it happened so gradually. But all of a sudden you look up and go, oh man, Sue died and Bob's dead, and then, but where are their kids and grandkids? Oh, they're not here. And then you see the pews begin to empty out because of that. So that's something that, like, it happens slowly, you don't even notice, but that's really how attendance is changing. There are some people who are leaving the pews. That's absolutely happening, but we cannot discount the role that generational replacement is playing in this large, and I tell pastors all the time, for every funeral you do, who are you baptizing? Or who are you, who's a new member joining your church? Because if you don't go a 1-to-1 there, your church is going to get smaller automatically because of that. So you got to constantly be thinking about what your church looks like in terms of generations as well.
Sam and I went to an exercise. Go on, Sam.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'll also add that the birth rates in the United States are getting to the point to where even biological growth is not going to be enough in your church to counter this trend.
Oh, I think to me, like, I get in a lot of trouble with the left side of my audience by saying you should get married and have kids. But I'm not like making like a moral argument or religious argument. I'm actually making an economic and policy argument, which is like, we've got the boomers are retiring in mass right now by the millions. Who is going to pay for their Social Security? And by the way, they're living longer than any generation in American history. I mean, the average age continues to creep up after COVID, obviously. But who is going to pay into those programs, so those Medicare and Social Security? And listen, one of my favorite films is called Children of Men, came out 15 years ago, starred Clive Owen. The whole conceit of the movie is that women stopped getting pregnant 18 years ago. And the bleakness of that society is really arresting. Like, all the schools have closed down. Think about that. Every elementary school closed down, then every high school closed down because there's no kids. America's not there yet, but we're trending in that direction. And who are we going to pass our legacy on to? All these institutions we built, all these businesses we built, all this goodwill that we've built. You got to have kids to sustain your church, to sustain your country, to sustain your society. And it's something that we're just not doing at high rates now.
We also look, Ryan, at the attendance frequency rate, and you've referred to that a good bit in your research. And if you have 100 people and they're attending every Sunday, you have an attendance of 100. If you have 100 people and they attend every other Sunday, however they're divided up, your attendance is being cut in half, but your pastor responsibility or ministry responsibility has not. And so we've been watching this whole attendance frequency. I think Sam and I brought that up about 15 years ago. And now some people are beginning to talk about that as well. So we have biological issues in terms of we're not replacing the older generations with younger generations. We have the attendance frequency issue. And quite frankly, we have a conversion issue too, that we're not reaching people with the gospel. All of these things, it's a downward slope.
I always say that religion has a lot of headwinds right now. Not a lot of wind at our back, a lot of wind at our face. And if you want to see, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book about Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. One of the reasons those guys were so successful is because they had access to computers before anyone else, when computers were really like blowing up. Could they have been successful without being in that moment? Maybe. But being in that moment with those opportunities is what allowed them to be who they are. The church, institutionally, we've got a lot more things working against us than working for us right now. And I think every pastor needs to realize that. One thing, like when I was younger, I believed that whole, John Wesley thing, if you set yourself on fire, people will come to watch you burn. Like if I just preach really well and serve really well, my church is going to grow. And it didn't grow. And I went through this like existential crisis of like, am I just a really bad pastor? Which is probably true. But this like external stuff, right, matters more than I can only work inside the box that's constructed for me. And the box that Christianity is working in has tons more constraints than it did 5, 10, 15, 50 years ago.
So the title of the podcast is Who is Attending Church More, all capitals, that I'm looking at, frequently now than in the past. Do we need to change the title according to this?
Is there anybody?
Yes.
Give us some good news, Ryan.
Here's some good news. This is like, I love doing talks and the people are like, could you give us some good news like on the way out so we can feel good about ourselves? I'm like, let me dig through the files. Let me find one thing. Here's the one thing. The share of evangelicals who are attending church every week has actually gone up over the last 50 years. It's gone up about 8%. And part of that is because evangelicalism has gotten slightly smaller over the last 50 years or so, which means it's gotten a bit more concentrated, right? So if what's happened is if I'm not an evangelical any longer, I stop attending, I also stop identifying as an evangelical. I stop identifying Southern Baptist or non-denom or AOG or whatever evangelical denomination is. I become a nun, which means my denominator gets smaller, but the share who are attending every week stays the same. So that means the percentage goes up. So we're actually seeing like the main line, which people talk about, oh, the liberal main line. They do attend a lot less than evangelicals, but the share of the main line that's attending every week is the same today as it was 50 years ago. Even though the main line's gotten from 30% of America to 10% of America, the share attending weekly has stayed the same because there's still that committed core of people left in the main line. And the same thing in Black Protestantism too, by the way. Right? Really, if you subdivide these groups, the only group that's really attending a whole lot less is the Catholic Church. Over 50% were attending Mass every week in the 1970s, and today it's closer to 25% are attending Mass. But for the three Protestant traditions we look at, evangelical, Black Protestant, and mainline, attendance is actually the same or up from what it was 50 years ago.
Are you including non-denom in the evangelical? I presume so.
Oh, absolutely, Tom. Otherwise, the evangelicals would be half the size they are right now.
And we'll be talking about that in another podcast, at least with the largest Protestant denomination for now.
Yes, but non-denoms are the future of American evangelicals and the future of American Christianity in a lot of ways. And I think we are not fully grasping all the implications that's going to have organizationally, socially, politically, theologically, because that's really this fragmented nature of American society has sort of oozed into American religion. And now it looks they are sort of mirroring each other at this point.
Wow. Sam?
So, Ryan, there was a theory that was proposed in the 1970s by Dean Kelly called the theory of institutional strictness. And I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here. You're nodding your head, so you do recognize what that is. Okay. Does that have anything to do with evangelicals attending more? Is his idea that if you are a stricter religious group, and by stricter, I just mean higher expectations. We'll just kind of generalize it that way, that, not a low expectation church, but a high expectation church. Does that help with attendance frequency? Because the theory in the 70s was that it does, and it draws more people in and it keeps more people. So what would you have to say about this theory of institutional strictness?
Yeah, so the way I phrase it is hard religion does better. What I mean by hard religion is a religion that demands a lot of you in terms of your behavior, your dress, your how you think. So like Hasidic Judaism is actually doing really well. They're growing rapidly because they also have like a big fertility thing too. The average family has like 6 or 7 kids, so that makes it. But very few people leave Hasidic Judaism. The way I think about this, kind of like from a metaphor, I'm a pastor in heart, so I think about metaphors. Is walls. How tall are your walls of your denomination or your institution, right? So, for instance, your non-denom church that has 5 services doesn't do membership because that's old school. You can kind of come and go as you please. They have very short walls, right? Easy to get in. But the downside of that is easy to fall out, right? So every person they bring in the front door, they're losing people out the back door who just stop coming for whatever reason. On the other side, you've got, really high intensity groups like some Pentecostal traditions where it's like, okay, we're going to have church for 3 hours every Sunday and 2 hours every Wednesday. Women, you're going to have to wear skirts and long hair, right? All those are things that build the walls up of those traditions, which means that it's harder to get in. Because it's not like you can just show up on a random Tuesday and be like, I'm part of your crew. It's like, well, you've got short hair and you're wearing pants. Like you've got to do something different in your life to become part of them. But here's the key. Once you're in, it's almost impossible to get out because you build this little kind of insular network amongst people in your tradition. So you have an insurance agent, a dentist, and a doctor, and and your friend group is all inside that tradition. So why would you leave? So I think every institution needs to be mindful, right, about how tall its walls are. Now, there are some downsides to tall wall, like Hasidic Judaism. You can't get divorced without permission from like the high council. So there's actually some abusive things that happen in high walled religions that we don't talk about enough. But on the other side is you got to have some walls too, right? You can't just be like in and out like a revolving door. And the data says that non-denoms actually have the highest churn rate of any Protestant tradition, which means more people coming in, but more people coming out than Baptists or Methodists or Lutherans or anyone else. And I think it's largely because they try to make it so easy. Easy is not always good. You've got to balance, stickiness. You've got to create some sort of stickiness in some way. And I think a lot of those churches really struggle by being so accessible and so easy to get to and so easy to worship with, what's the stickiness factor? How do you build community? How do you build those walls up around those people so they have a little bit harder time getting out and they'll stick around?
Again, one of the issues that we see from a micro perspective is getting into a small group. Once you get into a group, there's a sticky factor. You are connected to people. It may not be the high walls and the strictness that, like I don't know if Dean Kelly wrote like the high walls, but he wrote Why Conservative Churches Are Growing in 1970. I don't even remember what it said in it. It was in my dissertation. I'm sure it was really, really good stuff.
It was high level academic writing. Let's just put it that way. When you
it was written by a mainliner, so it really got headlines because it said Why Conservative Churches are Growing. So we're talking to Ryan Burge. This is the new Burge report. This is the first episode, number 001. I'm hopeful that it'll be a lot of episodes, and we're grateful.
Ryan, we have 998 more to go. So,
I'll be old and gray by the time we're done with this, guys. So hopefully, I'll have more graphs at some point to share with you. So.
And speaking of graphs, let's also mention your website. Everyone needs to go subscribe to your Substack, graphsaboutreligion.com. So if you're like, ooh, I want to see the data, I want to see what this guy does, I'm interested in digging into this further, you do need to go subscribe. I'm a subscriber. I absolutely love it. I read every article that he puts out. So graphsaboutreligion.com is where you can go to find his stuff.
Free post Monday, paid post Thursday. Tom, see, Sam is the gateway drug to this whole thing. You get Tom involved, and now look what you get. The end result. But I've
never been called a gateway drug.
Congratulations, Sam.
So I am the pot of evangelical Christianity.
That is exactly what you are, Sam. And I guess I'm the cocaine then, because like I'm the one step farther along.
Oh, yeah, maybe so. Maybe, I don't know. Yeah, you're the harder drug.
The hard drugs. But hey, free post Monday, paid post Thursday. I've got almost 100 posts up there. It's been around since April. It's really taken up more of my time, but I really love doing it because I don't have to pitch to anybody. I don't even have to because if you pitch like a newspaper, they're like, oh, what's the news peg? Like hook it to a current event. I'm like, I don't need current events. I got data. I'm just going to write about something I care about. So basically you get to go on a magical mystery tour of like, what is Ryan thinking about this week? And sometimes it makes a lot of sense, and sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense. And sometimes I write something, and I don't have a great conclusion for it. I just want to show you some data and say, here, think about these things and help me understand them better. And the comments get wild sometimes. So
he made a 60s reference now. Magical Mystery Tour, Beatles. You know, I can start singing
that.
The Magical Mystery Tour is coming
and that,
to take
that
you
was
away.
On Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club, that album, which is when they were doing drugs.
Yeah.
This is all coming full circle, Tom.
I know. I was about to say this took an odd turn.
I think they were doing drugs in 62 when they first formed, even before Ed Sullivan had them on the show. So one last word that I want to hear, and Sam, if you have something, I'll certainly bring you in. But first of all, remember, this is sponsored by Tithely. Tithely has a new report out. You can get the link, the 2023 State of the Church Giving Report. My last question for Ryan in this episode, but I'm glad 001 is not the terminal point. We will have more. My last question is, talk to a pastor or pastors and tell them what they need to know from what you're seeing. That is broad as it can be, but give them some kind of counsel.
Focus on the young. I know this sounds like so trite. Focus on retention. That's the word I would use from a statistician standpoint, which is young people who grow up in your church need to stick around because it's hard to convert. Like money-wise, time-wise, your success rate in conversion is darn near zero. If you look at like other religious traditions, the Latter-day Saints, it's like one. They go on a 2-year mission. They convert one person in 2 years, and they do it full-time for 2 years. Like it is hard to convert someone long-term, like committed, a conversion that lasts, basically. So keeping your own people is really key. And so one thing I would think about is how can you track people that used to go every week but now go, let's say, once or twice a month? You know, and they're kind of slipping. The great de-churching talked a lot about how de-churching happens like gradually and almost imperceptibly. And a lot of times in situations like that, behavioral economics says a nudge is really powerful. And a nudge is something so simple as just saying, you know, calling up someone or texting them and say, hey, I haven't seen you as much around. You okay? Little stuff like that can make all the difference because now it means like, oh, the pastor sees me and he cares about me. So focus on keeping your flock in your church. You can also focus on bringing new people in. That's important. Don't get me wrong. But I think a better strategy for maintaining your church is focusing on retention, primarily on retention, but also evangelization is sort of like a secondary thing to keeping people in. And also, when your young folks go away to college, they're actually not more likely to leave religion behind. That's a misnomer that I don't know how got perpetuated. I know how it did. God's not dead perpetuated that, okay? It is not true. Your educated young people are more likely to go to church, but you need them to come back to your church. So encourage them to come back. Come for Christmas, come for Easter. When they're around for the summer, say, hey, could you help out with the youth group? Right? Just continue to build those sticky ties with those 19, 20, 21-year-olds. And when they turn 23 and 24 and graduate, they'll be more likely to come back to your church because they feel like that bond has not been broken, that it continues on to that important stage of their lives. So retention is what I would tell pastors. Think about ways to tangibly retain the young people in your church.
Sam, I know I said I'll leave you the last question, but what we will do is we'll come back in a month. We'll come back on April 19th, 2024. We're going to date it then. We're going to come back in a month, and you're going to get to ask Ryan. His name's not Ryan. I want you to get it right. You're going to be able to ask Ryan the first question as we talk a month from now about a deep dive into the decline of the Southern Baptist Convention. Should be a fascinating topic. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, viewers. Thank you, Sam. And always thank you, Ryan, because this whole report is named after you. It is the Burge Report. Thank you, Tithley. Once again, look at the link, 2023 State of the Church. Come back in a month. You'll hear more from Ryan Burge as the old guy and the middle-aged guy try to offer some type of insight as well. We'll see you later.